Welcome everybody to our final Executive Speaker Series for the spring term. I'm Diane Single. You guys all see my name. I haven't hosted one of these yet, so I'm excited for everybody. Happy St. Patty's Day. I'm very excited today. We have one of our full-time alums joining us, Shizuka Suzuki, who goes by Shiz, so you'll hear the shortened version of her name as we go along. She's a full-time graduate from 2007, so she has a lot of experience and advice and a journey that's very relevant to you guys as you are all getting ready for internships and jobs as part of your full-time programs. And then we also have some alumni and some students from some of our other programs joining us as well today. So Shiz, I'm just going to start by turning it over to you. I know that we talked a little bit about your journey, a little bit about who you are, and that would be a great place to start as to who you are and how you got here.
Yeah, so Diane, thanks so much for having me. Thank you to all of the Pepperdine students and alumni and others to come listen in today on St. Patty's Day. You know, it's interesting, right? It's like, you know, I call it personal origin stories. I love hearing about people and their backgrounds and how they've, you know, gotten to where they are, because everybody does have a story. You know, and certainly I think through the things that we have gone through, you know, as a country, as a nation, and the things that have happened even over COVID, right, and last year, you know, I've become a bit more vocal and a bit more, I would say, sharing in terms of my personal story, because what I've realized is that there are so many people out there where my personal story will resonate with. And so I've been a bit more open about that. You know, for myself, I'm kind of I would call it a typical immigrant story to the United States. My parents and I came over when I was just a baby with $200 and a dream. And if anybody has seen that movie that has been grabbing some awards lately, it's a Korean director. It's called Minari, and it's a really great film. If you haven't caught it, you know, for those of you in town, the Santa Monica Drive-In Theater has had it for a while, and it is an immigrant story of you know, folks that have come over from Korea. And you know, that I've never seen a film that has so resonated with me in my story. So if you watch that film, that's kind of it's very similar to my story. I grew up in Minnesota, very, very small town, one stoplight, little place called Litchfield. My dad was a chicken sexer. Yes, it's a real thing. Google it. And so that is what brought us to the United States. And eventually we moved to California. The weather was a bit harsh in Minnesota, for those of you who are familiar with the Midwest. And we moved to Fresno, California, Central California, close to Yosemite, where my parents actually still live today. You know, eventually, right, it was, you know, going to college. You know, financials were pretty tough growing up. I went to community college in Fresno for a couple of years, and I was able to then utilize that to transfer to UCLA, which is, you know, I always knew I wanted to get out of Fresno. I wanted to get out of town. I wanted to do something bigger with my life. I didn't know what that quite was at that point in time. But I did, I was able to leverage that great program to get to UCLA, work 3 jobs to put myself through undergrad. I had a job in between classes, job during the weekday nights, and job on the weekends. As y'all know, it is not cheap to live here in LA. And so, you know, and then I did 5 years of IT after that. I realized at some point that I didn't enjoy it. I wanted something different with my life and career, and I needed a career change. And that's where I joined Pepperdine in the full-time program in 2005. And I joined the full-time program. It was the first time I had taken time off from working. I actually did not work during my time. And I remember, I'll never forget that at that moment. It was a gift that I gave to myself for those 20 months. And so I know, you know, I've had this mentorship conversation with others who have been at those crossroads. But anyway, so that is what brought me to Pepperdine. I guess I'll kind of pause there and see where we want to go next.
Well, I know we worked together closely. It was my early years in Pepperdine, and you are very active as a student, still made the most of that by taking on and exploring leadership opportunities. What inspired you during your time in our programs to make the decision you did for the career path that you eventually ended up choosing?
Yeah. It was what I loved about Pepperdine. It was the small community. It's just so personal. Everything about it's so personal, which is why, I mean, like Diane, you and I still, right, keep in touch, or Michelle and Karen and others from the, from the recruiting side. I know we're all very close. But for me, it was a great opportunity where there were companies like AT&T that came and recruited from Pepperdine. And I was in my first year when they came to recruit for both full-time as well as internship programs, which I think is the same setup that they have today. So see Michelle, if any of my story resonates with you. Basically it was a really extraordinary opportunity for me. It was hearing about, gosh, like all the different opportunities within a company. And certainly an internship program where I can give it a whirl for a summer and see if I even liked it, see if there was even a fit for me in a different location. Took me up to the Bay Area at the time. And frankly, it was just, the leadership development program was something that really appealed to me because, again, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, air quotes, when I grew up. But what it did was it gave me the opportunity to really gain some solid leadership skills within a really large business. But at the same time, and I say this a lot, is that it allowed me to continue being an entrepreneur, if you will, call it Shizuka, right? So my own personal brand, my own personal career journey, which is something that I still got to continue owning and building and within this, call it confines of a large company. So that's kind of what drew me to AT&T.
Well, it leveraged your leadership opportunities. So just so everybody knows, we didn't comment on the role you serve in now, which is the head of sponsorships and experiential marketing at AT&T. So we're going to get to that eventually, because I think the big question is when you hear that title, what does that mean? But we're going to go a little more into your journey because you've commented that you've had many roles within AT&T in a really major career your own. So I know a lot of students, some want to work for large organizations, some want to be entrepreneurs. How do you make your career your own? I mean, AT&T is such a massive organization. So how do you own that? How did you navigate and make the decisions that you made to end up where you are now?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So just for context, I am in my 14th year with the company, which also means I've been out of B school for 14 years. It's gone by in a heartbeat. I'm also in my 9th role with the company, and I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of background into what those roles were, what the decisions behind why I decided to take some of them, et cetera. So a bit of the behind the scenes look. So when I first started, so I came back from the summer internship program and was offered an opportunity to start in LA. And the funny story goes, I actually had no intent of ever leaving LA when I actually joined Pepperdine. I loved LA. I was never going to leave, but life has its own, funny journeys. And, you just never, it's always about expecting the unexpected. I think that's just, one of those things in life that will, being flexible and agile and what it throws your way, I think is a really important muscle to be able to flex. And so I decided to start up in the Bay Area. And why is that? The Bay Area at the time was where the action was, meaning it was one of the major headquarters within the business. So, and why not be where that action is? And so I did start in the Bay Area. I managed a call center of 19 service reps. It was a union environment, completely different from anything I've ever experienced before. You learn, right? You learn from your team. They teach you about the business. They teach you about, because at the end of the day, one of the things that I look for in terms of the people that I hire or the people on my team, certainly it's, surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. I mean, let them teach you, let them, fill in the gaps in your experiences or in your, what if there's any gaps, right? You fill that with the people around you. And so I did a year in a call center, and then I followed that up with a year out in the field. So I literally was a construction foreman, whatever you want to call it, hard hat boots. I was in the South San Francisco Bay Area. I had a crew of 8 copper splicers. I was the only female manager at the time in that region. And literally that, right? My text climbed poles, all that kind of great stuff. I loved it. It's still probably the most difficult job I've had to this day, just emotionally, physically. Like if you imagine my first day, I'll never forget, I walked into this crew room of these 8 guys, all men. And it was, you know, some of these guys had like 40 years of service with the company, and they saw me walk in, and I'll never forget, they're like, who is she, right? Like, what is she doing here? She's like my daughter's age, right? Or granddaughter's age, or whatever it was. And, you know, and guess what? Roles like this, what it teaches you is really about how do you inspire others? How do you earn that respect to get to that place where you can then start to inspire others, right? Talk about raw leadership skills. And although, again, union environment, et cetera, you know, it was very different from the call center, but man, the experiences and the things that you learn, you know, your toughest critics are sometimes the ones that teach you your biggest lessons. And that was that, right? So, and over beers one day, if anybody wants some really good stories, I've got some great ones from that job. But I'll skip forward into the storylines that I can stay on today. At that point in time, the company went through a bit of a shift. If you start to think about who is AT&T, what is AT&T at the time, when I first started, we were just transitioning from a wireline telephone company, if you remember what that is, into a wireless company. We just acquired Singular. We had just announced the first iPhone, and there was this transition happening. And for me, it was about reading the writing on the wall. Like I said, I went to San Francisco because I wanted to be where the action was, but next was what, right? And so I knew it was either going to be in Atlanta, which is our wireless headquarters, or Dallas, our corporate headquarters. And I decided I wanted to go to Atlanta. Why is that? I figured I'd eventually end up in Dallas, so why not just start in Atlanta? Sent me out to Atlanta. You know, again, I've really never been outside of California other than my stint in Minnesota. But, you know, sometimes it's those things that scare you that you need to do early on in your career to see, you know, because sometimes if you don't know what it is that you want, sometimes you need to, if you know what you don't want or don't like, those are important too, right? Those are all important things for you to understand and to use as you start to filter through your career aspirations and where you're headed in your journey. I did a stint in mobility network operations, a bit different from anything else, again, that I've done. You know, I'll never forget at the time, it was when Michael Jackson passed away. So I know that was eons ago, but it was the first time that news spread through text messages as opposed to it being a voice call on your cell phone. And our network it pushed the SMS and that text network to its limits. And I'll never forget sitting in that office, all the engineers around me frantically just trying to keep the server loads equal so it didn't take the entire network down. But gosh, like, just what an experience. So that kind of concluded my leadership rotational program, right? The foundational elements of the business. Like I said, you know, I knew during those 2.5 years that like anything else I would do from then on would build on the foundational things that I've learned in those jobs. And certainly I 110% say like I am a much better leader because of it. From then on, I went into a pricing and analytics role. I have, you know, of course, advice I had heard early, do the things that scare you early. And that's basically what I did. I was, you know, while I was at Pepperdine, I loved my OB classes, my marketing classes, international business, all of that stuff was great. Pricing and analytics were probably some of the toughest things for me. I decided to do that as a job. And again, you learn from your peers, you learn from the people around you. I worked on some of the biggest accounts on the business, like Home Depots of the world, $200 million a year in revenue. How do you continue to incent them for growth without giving them the cheapest price? Because it's not always about the cheapest price. It's about bringing the value, innovation, et cetera, to the table. And so I did that for a little bit of time. And then I got called to join a brand new organization that got started, which launched our first cloud products in our business services division. Did that for a little bit in terms of taking products, white labeling. It's a lot of operational, a lot of leadership, right? How do you motivate and inspire others that don't report to you for exceptional performance, right? You've got tight deadlines you got to meet. All of those types of experiences, certainly, you know, the things that I've learned up until that point paid off. And then one day I got a call. It was, hey, come out to Dallas, corporate headquarters, need you to be a chief of staff for our head of brand. And it was literally like the dream job that I had always wanted. I really, the woman who was here at the time, Esther Lee, I heavily respected her. She was also an Asian female, high level in the business. She had worked at Coke, done some brand work there. And, you know, and so I got this really incredible chance to basically be her right-hand woman for, I don't know, 2.5 years, and to be able to see the different things that she, you know, she did within the business. It was really incredible. And just when I thought it couldn't get any better, then I got an opportunity after that to support and serve our chairman and CEO, Randall Stevenson, who just recently retired. And it was to do basically all of any large scale events that he would attend, internal, external. So that could have been, you know, let's say an all employee town hall across the globe, 350,000 employees at the time, all time zones, et cetera. How does that get constructed? The whole operations of that, et cetera. All the way to towards the end of my time in that particular role was when we actually went through the Time Warner merger. So being responsible for all the logistics involving our board of directors. It was about our media trip to New York, LA, et cetera, in regards to, you know, as we made that announcement that day of this, you know, of this deal happening, and everything that kind of came from that. It was, I got to say, like when I first started in that call center, I could have never imagined a career that would allow me to see some of the things and certainly experience some of the things that I've experienced. And then at that point, we had already acquired DirecTV a couple of years before. I knew that there were some opportunities in LA, as y'all know, right? My original intent was never to leave LA, so there was an opportunity to come back. I did some office transformational types of projects. That Atlanta office I told y'all about, they decided to move that entire operation here to El Segundo. And so it was, I got a call, you know, I get a lot of calls like on these things where it's like, hey, listen, I need something done. I need somebody to do it quickly and I need it done right. So I've built this reputation for you build a reputation for yourself at a large company. And it was that, I need you to move all these people. There's a whole operation that goes behind that. PR, what's the timeline? Every detail you could imagine. And you've got to think of what those details are, although we know you've never done this before. And so that was about maybe a 7-month gig, because it was more, you know, we got it to a place where everybody got moved and settled. And then from then on, one day I got a call. It was, hey, listen, we'd love for you to come in and do a transformative effort on our sponsorships investment. Come. And that was 3 years ago.
That's amazing. So you talked, so I know you're in the sponsorship side of things. We have a lot of students, as we've talked about, who are interested on the sports side of businesses. And that is such a wide area and a wide range of opportunities there. So can you talk a little bit about what is sponsorships? What is experiential marketing? And a little bit also to give some insight for students on the different areas within the sports industry.
Yeah. So sponsorships and experiential marketing is, I gotta say, I feel like I've found a home, right? Throughout all the different experiences, I have really fallen in love with it. It's a role that falls within the global marketing organization because first and foremost, it has to pay off for the brand. And I know, I'm sure you guys are learning about this in your marketing classes, and you start to think about what is some of the most valuable things that you can have within a business. And certainly there's a lot of valuable things. But one of those things, especially when you're a company with a legacy as long as AT&T's, it is certainly the brand. There's a lot of powerful business drivers that a brand can do. I'm sure if you start to think about some of those brands that you're very passionate about, right? Customers are willing to pay higher prices. Customers are willing to spend more with you. They're willing to forgive you when, unfortunately, things go wrong. That the brand is really that, like, it's an emotional meeting ground between a company and its people. When I say people, that's customers, prospects, employees, that's super important. That emotional component is really component. So from a sponsorships perspective, now I'm coming from a brand point of view. I'll get into some of this in a sec, but like when you think about sponsorships, there's all sorts of sponsorships, right? So obviously, top of mind, you can think of things like Nike and Tiger Woods, or Nike and LeBron James, or or, or right, if you're watching TV, like March Madness is about to tip off here at the end of the week, you're certainly going to see AT&T all over it because we're one of the biggest sponsors. But it's an association between, call it, two brands, right? And so in my case, it's the AT&T brand in an association with something else that people are passionate about and are really excited about. And when you're a sponsorships marketer within a company, it is all about that. It is about how do you connect with an audience at a very, at a passionate level, right? This isn't necessarily, I always like to differentiate the fact, it's a different lever you can pull in marketing than advertising per se, right? Advertising, you can tell a story, certainly you can do some of these really unique things, but really sponsorships is really bespoke marketing. You could do a lot of experiential, so you can create moments that money can't buy, right? When we take some of our biggest customers to the grounds of the Masters over at Augusta National, and you take them through Magnolia Lane, right? Talk about hitting people's passion points. Those are the types of things that we focus on. And so what's really important is that if you're a business, now every business is going to do sponsorships for different reasons. For us, we've got a brand everybody knows, right? We don't need much awareness assets, I would call it. We're looking for these unique ways in which we can really connect with our customers. And that's kind of how we like to use our sponsorships relationships. It's really exciting. We've got one of the largest portfolios in the country, which, I got to say, it still humbles me to this day that I got called to take this on, given I had no experience in this whatsoever. And most people that are in my shoes have come up through, either a sports league, team, agency. They have degrees in sports or sponsorships marketing. So most people have some type of an experience set. I didn't have that. I came in I'll be honest, not even really being a huge sports fan, but other than the fact that I knew that my leadership needed a transformation made, and I was the one to do it. So, that's kind of in a quick nutshell of what sponsorships is, why we invest in it, why it's important, that sort of a thing.
Right. We talk a little bit about leadership. So you've had a lot of opportunities within AT&T, and what is your leadership style? Because it's lent itself to success within the organization. How do you AT&T, when you started in 2007 to now, the industry, it went from, as you say, a wired company to more of a technology entertainment company. So how do you stay relevant and grow? 14 these days, a lot of people don't stick around for 14 years in a single company. Yeah. And so they learn by changing around, but you're growing within an individual organization. But how do you adapt your leadership style? How do you continue to grow your skills throughout your journey?
I think in terms of staying relevant, it's always education, right? It's what's going on in the industry, what's going on with competitors. Our competitor set continues to grow, right? Originally, it was more of the wireline, the landline carriers, certainly with, within the wireless space, there's the obvious of Verizon, T-Mo, and keeping up with what they're doing. But then, once we acquired DirecTV, that grew, right? It's now Comcast, others. And then now, if you start to think about the space that we're in with Warner Media, HBO Max, then, again, the competitive set starts to grow. Now our competition is Disney Plus, Hulu, Amazon Primes of the world. And so that's, I think, just education. I don't read a lot of books. Gosh, I need to do more of that, but I'm a voracious, I am on the new, I am always on my phone because I always want to keep up with the latest news. I always have, CNBC going here on my TV. I do like to keep up with the industry, and the industry is, call it the industries that we're in. And certainly the industry of, call it sports or sponsorships marketing, that I also keep a really close eye on. I think from being a leader perspective, I think my philosophy has always been about people first. and your team first. And, I think back to those things that I learned and experienced when I was managing the call center or, out in the field, and all of those things still apply. At the end of the day, we are all people. We all wake up wanting to do something, we want to make an impact. We want to do something that brings value, right? Nobody wakes up in the morning like, I don't want to bring value. That doesn't happen, right? So as a manager, as a leader of the business, it is my responsibility to make sure that I am tapping that from every single employee that is in my organization. And sometimes it goes beyond that, because when you work for a large company, right, a lot of times you're working across different business units and folks that don't report to you, and you still have to drive, call it results from those folks. But it really does come from, there's that people connection perspective, and that takes a bit of like artwork. There's a relationship building you've got to do. You spend a lot of time talking to people and listening, most importantly. Well, I'll just use an example. When I was out in the field, it was some of my most, disgruntled, crotchety, like, employees. I'll just tell you, I mean, it was understanding. It took me a long time to break down those barriers, but I'd go out there every day. They hated seeing me. They're like, damn it, the boss is back, right? I would show up, and if it's a hot day, I'd take them some water. If it's a cold day, I'd offer to buy them coffee out of the taco truck. Like, whatever it took to get them to start opening up. And what I realized there after talking to them was that they didn't feel respected by the younger guys. And so these little insights, right, help you understand as a leader, how do you need to contextualize maybe certain things? How do you need to help make them feel valued in this case? How do you get the others to, so there's a bit of that kind of art of that goes into it. So OB class, obviously, and that still rings true today. It is about understanding, especially, gosh, like, I'm sure, people come across this all the time, right? There's another group out there doing something and it's stepping on your toes and it's not going right. And it's like, okay, let's take a step back, right? Instead of it being, well, that person is stupid or this is not working right, right? Take a step back. What are they being incentivized by, right? What's kind of what are their goals? What are their things that they're trying to achieve? And what is it that my team is trying to achieve, right? It's kind of like stepping it back, peeling back that onion. And then more than likely, and then, spend a lot of time with them trying to figure out what's going on, you'll be able to figure out something that kind of works for all. And by the way, at the end of the day, if you really keep leaning back into the fact that the North Star in all of this is really, corporate success and driving, results for the business, and then usually people will align. People will get aligned behind your vision, your call, what have you. But it is definitely that. For me anyways, I lead with, call it the people-centric leadership part of it. Now, that doesn't mean I'm a soft leader. Like, I have high expectations. My team has called my approach a bit of a velvet hammer. But you know what? At the end of the day, everybody likes to win. And if, when you work with me, again, it's about building a reputation. If you work with me, we all succeed and we all succeed together. So usually people get excited when I reach out to say, hey, let's try this thing together.
I know you, Shiz, you're going to work just as hard, if not harder, than everybody else around you. So you kind of prove it through showing up and being there as well. So I know that's your style. We have a couple questions coming in. One from a second-year student about sponsorship. So Natalie Salazar is asking a question of, how do you determine what sponsorships to move forward with, when to retract a sponsorship? Because sometimes there's tense situations and sometimes values differences, when to not move forward. Is something you're halfway through negotiating something and something may happen with somebody. How do you determine when do you move forward, and when is the right time that it's not necessarily the right maneuver and process for the business itself?
That's a really great question. There is a piece of work that we do behind the scenes, and we regularly update this. There's, call it a strategic view of, call it our portfolio mix. So that's like the types of properties that we're in, number one, but then even within a vertical. So like, let's say we decide music, right? Even within music, then what are the specific artists or properties like Spotify that we might want to build a relationship with? So there's a whole body of work that just continuously goes, and we're updating that constantly to just kind of keep tabs on what's going on. Once we know, right, then I think it is a matter of, and certainly we've done this. This is no secret. For us, some of that transformation work I got hired for, by the way, some of that was letting some sponsorship deals go. So y'all here in LA, if any of you from the Bay Area, I know you guys will remember that AT&T Park, SBC Park. We had our name on that building for many, many years, and a sponsorship of, it's a naming rights deal basically. And those are some very hard decisions. And certainly when you've had a relationship for as long as you have, for us, it was really about the audience, right? The audience that, in this case, baseball was connecting with, and this particular property, for the price that we were paying for it, was it right for us? Is it right for us now? Is it right for us, call it 3 to 5 years from now? These deals that we cut are generally multi-year deals. These aren't like, hey, let's just try it for a year, right? It's generally not that. These are longer term relationships that you sign up for. Certainly in a naming rights deal, it's like 10 years minimum, right? So you think about like AT&T Stadium, the Dallas Cowboys, our name's going to be on there for a while. And then, certainly there are going to be properties that we're like, hey, this is really interesting. Let's start talking to them. You get into the negotiations. Negotiations can last somewhere between, I don't know, maybe a couple months. I've been a part of some that have gone almost a year. And there has been instances, right, at the 11th hour, we have decided to walk away. Now, sometimes it's them, the property. Sometimes it's been us from a brand perspective. Why would that happen? Internally, right? Like, let's say business priorities change, and let's say there was a specific reason for a specific relationship, and let's say that reason goes away, then guess what? Then if that reason goes away, then we should not be spending shareholders' money to go invest in this relationship. So there's kind of that component of it. Now, sometimes what's happened is you get into a relationship and maybe, so what'll happen is they bring us a pitch, right? So they bring us a pitch, hey, we're going to give you these assets for this amount of money. We do evaluation on that. I got a whole team that does that. And then we look at the numbers, right? From is it positive? Is it challenged? Is it, and if it's challenged, are there other assets that we want? Or do we just kick it back and tell them to bring us something else? And then once we kind of land on, call it, an assortment of assets, then we really get into the nitty gritty. And certainly it's usually not the assets that make a deal fall apart. It's the T's and the C's. So for example, it could be something like confidentiality, right? Like confidentiality clauses, moral turpitude, right? Like, listen, do we want to be paying for an association with another team or a brand or what have you, where something goes wrong, like really wrong, right? We need a nuclear option to get out, right? Because again, like if there's something bad going on, we cannot have our brand tainted by that brand, or for it to seem as though we support them, right? Because that's what sponsorships is really all about. So I think there's different reasons why like things like that can happen, and certainly it does. I mean, those things you'll never hear about because those are the announcements that never happen. Yeah. So I think that's a really great question.
Well, we have, you talked about with the sponsorships and March Madness. So Karen Weiss, who you know very well, submitted something about the March Madness tournament. What has your name on it? What's your stamp? Like, are we going to see anything that you were a part of as part of March Madness as we launch it this week, starting tomorrow?
Yeah, so March Madness this year, it's so exciting because last year we had to cancel it, right, because of COVID. The beauty of March Madness is when we made the acquisition of Warner Media, which also includes Turner Sports. Turner Sports and CBS jointly present March Madness NCAA, and that's an interesting asset for us. That's something that differentiates us from any other, call it from a wireless perspective, right? Like any other company out there. It gives us a lot of flex in terms of the things we might want to put into broadcast or not. And it just makes it really, it's interesting. It certainly opened a door for us that was perfect for, call it COVID, when we've had to stop. We won't have anything on site. There won't be any sort of experiential or what have you out in Indianapolis like we normally would. They have this new bubble scenario, right? Athletes go into the bubble, for safety and health reasons. And so for us, a lot of our focus is really on what we are building in broadcast. We've done actually quite a few integrations in broadcast around the AT&T 5G HoloVision experience. What that is there's basically a 5G kit, call it in the bubble, another 5G kit that's somewhere else. And basically people get volumetrically captured and they show up as holograms. I mean, it's kind of like what you'd see in Star Trek. So I know some of the interviewers have joked like, oh, it's like beam me up, Scotty. But literally you can, so like basically somebody in the bubble, to keep them safe, right? They will get interviewed by somebody outside of the bubble, but you're literally looking eye to eye to a hologram. And so we capture this whole storyline. Obviously, we want the interview storyline to be really something interesting or unique, right, to this particular fan base. But, you know, CBS Turner will actually integrate it into the broadcast itself and tell a storyline there around 5G, you know, our focal products and, you know, product and service for for this year, and tell some really unique stories there. So outside of that, there's a few other 5G tricks I know we've got up our sleeve. I can't talk about them because I know PR would kill me, but please look out for them because we are super excited. There's a lot of first ofs that we've got up our sleeve for this tournament. So look out for us. Well, actually, you probably can't miss us if you're watching.
Well, most of us will. I think we're all kind of hungry for something else right now. So that's great. One of our students who will be actually starting with AT&T, she's one of our second-year students, Amanda Callahan. She wants to know how you're very focused on the success of the company and as a team and as the objectives of the company. How do you assess your individual goals and objective? How do you keep that in check and to make sure that you're doing what's right for you?
That's a great question as well. You know, I think. So first and foremost, yes, for me, it's always been about the company. It's been about my team. It's about how am I performing for my team, et cetera, right? All those types of things that I do regular check-ins on, at least on an annual basis, by the way. I do 360 reviews with my team every single year, and they give me very honest feedback throughout the years, which is really great. I think for me personally, I would say I don't do a great job of that. I'll just be honest, right? And that is just the reality of the situation. Prior to COVID, I was on the road 85% of the time, perhaps. I mean, I would literally fly in from some event. I'd be back off the ground. I mean, I live 7 minutes from LAX for a reason. I mean, I was always on the road and at the time, right, you're just in it. So you don't really realize what's really going on for yourself and your relationships around you. And I think there's, you know, when you have moments like COVID, right, these are moments to pause and reflect. I haven't gotten on a plane in over a year, which is like unheard of. Like, I'm surprised American Airlines hasn't called to make sure I'm still alive. Like, hey, Shiz, are you still
on those elite qualifying miles?
Right? I mean, it's crazy to see a zero on my account. Anyways, but like it has been really good. It has, you know, I've set you call it goals and standards for myself. You know, in the past, I used to be in the office ready to take calls at 6 a.m. Pacific, and I would go all the way until 6 p.m. Pacific. I mean, literally burning it on both ends. You come home and I jokingly called it my second shift, and then otherwise I'd be out on a plane somewhere, right? I've done crazy things like that. And, you know, not because the company's asked me to, but because I'm passionate about what I do, right? And, but I think that, you know, when you have these opportunities to pause and really take note, like now, I don't take anything before 7 unless I absolutely have to. But like I have an assistant who watches out for me, and she makes sure that I do not start before 7 a.m. And I certainly try to cut it off no later than 4 Pacific. Like those are like rules, right? And certainly being home is helpful and useful, certainly in my personal relationships. But there is that. I think that we do need to make those moments of check-in. Now, I could probably even do better than where I'm at right now. I know I can. But that's all part of the personal journey and, you know, learning more about you and yourself and what you need. So I think there's a bit of that everybody has to figure out for themselves.
Right. Well, if you could take the Shiz of today and take one piece of advice and give it to the Shiz of 2006 or 7, what would you tell her?
Man, I would tell her that she is more powerful than she knows. You know, like there is a certain level of confidence, certainly experience brings you, I'm sure some of that's age, but you know, I remember coming into the company with a bit of like a trepidation and uncertainty, certainly when you're joining a company of this size, like everybody I'm sure feels that way. But you know, it is remarkable about, even at a company like this, that people can have an impact. I always tell everybody on my team and anybody else that comes close to it, like, you know, in the groups that I work in, it's like, listen, every single person on this call right now has nothing to do with level, has nothing to do with what you're paid, but everybody here is a leader of the business. And what that means is that everybody can have impact. That might be impact on somebody else, right? That could be an impact on, you know, somebody else in another team. That could be impact certainly for some huge revenue generating project, of course, right? But every single one of these little things add up to something much, much greater. And, you know, in some of the work that we're doing right now, in the last couple of years, we've really focused on elevating women in sports. This is something personally really important to me. And guess what? I'm not going out of my way to spend more money. It's not that, because my budget doesn't increase year over year. But what it does mean is, how can I use the levers that I have to make an impact for the world in some way? That also delivers on the business, right? And so just a couple stats, like women's sports gets less than 4% of media, like just media time in general. And that's just insane to me, given how incredible women athletes are, right? And then sponsorship dollars, less than 1%. And so for me, I was like, well, crap, when we were signing that NBA deal, I was like, don't just throw in the WNBA. Nah. We're going to go big on this, and we're going to make a mark on this. And guess what? Most brands, and this is not a knock against them, this is just about prioritization, right? Other brands that are in with the NBA all have a sponsorship with the WNBA. They just choose not to activate it. Well, guess what? So if you're one of the few brands that choose to activate it, then it's less clutter. It's less clutter. It's cheaper. You get better assets. Like, I'm like, this is like a marketer's dream if you really think about it. And then, you know, from there, it has been little things like last year, this one just, I still get goosebumps from this one. WNBA commissioner, Kathy Engelbert, who used to be the CEO of Deloitte, she was about to tip off her, and the WNBA draft. That was the first draft that was virtual. It wasn't it wasn't Goodell with the NFL. It was actually Kathy with the WNBA. And as we got into it, we were buying our ad units and stuff, like ad units, like commercial time and what have you with ESPN. You know, it's ESPN, ABC, Disney, right? One conglomerate. We're like, hey, where are you airing it? And they told us ESPN2. Now, there is not a single sport going on in, what was it, April of last year. We're like, why the heck is it on ESPN2, right? And we said, listen, you move it to ESPN and we will triple our investment in the advertising for this piece. And they said, oh, okay. And they did. They moved it to ESPN. Guess what? The ratings were through the roof. The ratings were through the roof because most people didn't even know that it existed. I'm sure there's people on the call right now. They're like, what? I didn't know there was a WNBA draft. There is, right? But that awareness is something that is not out there because it's not being shown. It's not being shown in the places where sports fans are. And so guess what? For this year, I was really excited to hear that, you know, they were like, yeah, so WNBA draft is set for April 15th, where I'm like, what channel is it on? And they said ESPN. I said, as it should be. You know, and the W is just one of those examples of, and certainly under Kathy's leadership, they have just remarkable ratings. The rating story last year was just crazy. And just goes to show that people want to see that, right? People want to see more women's sports. And so guess what? Give it to them. Give people what they want. And so things like that, right? Like things where I can impact or affect change. And, you know, I've got a 5-year-old niece, and I always tell her every single day, like, you can do anything your heart desires, right? You can be pro athlete, you can be a, you know, pro golfer, you can be a CEO in a boardroom, baby. You can do whatever you want. And, you know, it's things like this, and representation matters, kind of to my point earlier about that movie, the Minari movie, right? Representation matters. And customers of today and tomorrow, guess what? That's what they want. People want to invest their money, spend their money with companies that they see themselves being represented in, right? They want to buy and watch the content that they see themselves represented in. It's really important. It's really important that companies think of that, and that they're providing, again, give the customers what they want more of. So.
Great. Well, thanks. Well, we're coming close to the hour, and I have another question. If you think about with MBA students going out into the field and they're just getting out there, what skills should they invest their time in now? So because they have to come to the table, they start their internships, they start their jobs, and their expectation is, you know, you're going to hit the job, you're going to hit the ground running. Like what types of skills should they work on developing, and how do they continue to reinvent those skills as they're working through their careers? Because I mean, you've had a lot of opportunity and you use definitely a lot of those soft skills, but you're continually having to learn. And how do you make that happen? And what would you recommend for them to do now?
I think one of the important art forms that sometimes, I mean, it is what it, I mean, you know, we're in this, call it virtual digital world, but communication across all mediums, right? So whether that be in an email, whether that be in a one-on-one meeting over Zoom, whether that be over social media, even that your communication style, your whatever that is really important to, I think, finesse, finalize, because sometimes if people don't actually get to see you like physical you, and in a meeting or in a room, right? Sometimes that's the only, call it like representation they know of you, right? In an email or other. That, you know, you think about, like, I always think about company, corporate brands, but certainly, right, what's really important is also your personal brand. And some people jokingly say it's what people say about you behind your back. But how do you cultivate that, right? And especially in a world where you're not in front of people, I think it's something really important to think about. So communication skills just overall across all mediums. I think, you know, a close second to that is just, again, like your leadership, no matter what level you are in. Don't bring your boss just problems, bring solutions, bring unique ideas. You know, if you start to look at, I mean, like the stuff that's happening right now, even in sports, like this is really crazy, right? Bleacher Report, they're within the family, Warner Brother family, NFTs, some of these like digital collection type things that are just coming out. Like they spent 9 days on a project based on an idea that somebody junior brought to the table. And it was like $1 million idea in 9 days, right? Those are those types of things. Like if you're bringing some fresh, new, you know, things to the table, and, you know, sometimes it is easier to be the new person on the team and saying, hey, I got this crazy idea. Like, what have you thought about? Like, it's easier to do that when you're, call it, the new person on the team. But don't be afraid to speak up, right? All that goes into your leadership skills and your ability to be able to, you know, this is about pitching your idea. This is about gaining consensus. This is about convincing others to take a chance. Like, you know, how do you think about that? I mean, those are all skills I know. I mean, I really remember going through all that in every class that I took at Pepperdine. But use those skills, right? It's communication, leadership, it's all of that together.
It sounds like creativity is a lot of what you're working on. How do you activate and encourage creativity of ideas?
I think it's about sometimes I use a lot of analogies with my team because I'm just more of a visual person. But when I took this job with Experiential specifically, some of the ideas were stale, had been done before. And so what I told the team was, and some of that came from, you know, there's a bit of like, I would call it cultural, like corporate cultural artifacts in that as well. So it's understanding what might be holding the team back. Then I think it's how do you unleash that, right? And so for me, it was about, the analogy I used was, I don't want to have to push you towards the ledge. I always want to pull you back from the ledge. So if you're bringing me an idea, let's think about that, right? If it's an idea where you think I'm going to push you further on, it's probably not big enough, right? Bring me something that allows me to like then pull you back from the ledge and say, that's a bit crazy, is kind of the, you know, the analogy that I used, you know, because sometimes like give somebody something visual to focus on or a filter that is something that is easier to you you know, to like bounce something off of, right? Like, you know, listen, every company is going to have its, here's my cultural pillars, here are my rules of the road, blah, blah, blah. And I think we all understand that at a very like logical level. But sometimes if you want to really get those creative juices moving, then give them something a little bit more like animated or something more visual to be able to use to bounce off of like their filter system.
Well, great. Well, it was wonderful, wonderful to catch up with you today, Shiz. It was so great to catch up. It's always fun. And I thank you so much for joining us today and for it's our final one of the spring term, and your energy and your passion is definitely motivational for students. And thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Good luck to everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. It's great to catch up.